Hey guys, welcome to our Lunch and Learn. Today we'll be talking about heads up front-end developers for Sitecore by Anandita. She'll be presenting this, so take it away, Anandita.
Thanks, Akshay. Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm going to be taking you through this session where we talk about the guidelines for front-end teams when you're working with developing Sitecore sites. So, all right, first up, why do we need to talk about this? Now, upfront, I'd like to say that I'm actually a backend developer. I don't have much experience with full-fledged front-end development, but I've worked with a lot of front-end teams on various Sitecore projects, and the front-end teams had varying levels of experience working with Sitecore projects. So, based on all of that experience, I've kind of gathered these points, and these are especially useful for greenfield projects using vanilla Sitecore, and they're most helpful in scenarios where the front end team is new with working on Sitecore, but it's also helpful for the backend developer, which will help in streamlining the process and reducing the back and forth and collaboration required with the front end team while doing development. So while Sitecore doesn't really impose any restrictions on the HTML, there are certain best practices which, when followed, it will make the interaction of the backend components with Sitecore with the HTML much smoother, and it will enable the backend Sitecore developers to follow best standards as well. So the front end team, in this case, if they follow these guidelines, they can simply deliver the HTML and the front end assets as is expected for any website, and following these pointers will make for a seamless experience, even for a front-end developer or a team which doesn't have any experience with working on Sitecore sites. So we're also going to go over identifying the concerns and addressing concerns in advance. Usually, these are things that you address along with the design team, and if they're addressed in advance, it definitely helps in when you're integrating the backend with the front end during the final development. So overall, it will help in reducing the collaboration time and also keeping a check on your overall development time. Some of these things that I'm going to go over, it might seem pretty trivial to experienced backend developers, but this is definitely going to be helpful in, again, streamlining the process and keeping the back and forth to a minimum with the front end team. So the first thing we're going to be talking about is page layouts. Vanilla Sitecore as such has a very component-based architecture for pages. So when you get a design, the first thing to do, and this is as a business analyst or as a tech lead or a front-end lead, depending on the process that you have in your project. So the first thing to do would be to identify the page layouts. So in this case, you would divide your page into blocks. So the example that you're seeing here, we have 3 blocks, the top, the middle, and the bottom, and these will materialize into placeholders. So in each placeholder, you would be able to drop components one below the other, and the components can be restricted to certain placeholders. But the takeaway here is to create these page layouts where you have these buckets where you're going to drop components one below the other. In this case, this is just a single column layout. And here's some more examples where, with more complex layouts. So in this case, you have the same, the top, middle, and the bottom, and then you also have a page layout with a 2-column layout and the right sidebar. So this results in 2 more placeholders, the left and the right sidebar, and ideally you would place components one below the other, which is outlined here in yellow. So you can have more complex designs as well, where you use combinations of different layouts, and you typically would not see a design like this that I'm showing on the right here. This is just for the sake of kind of making a point that yeah, you can use them in combination and can use them more than once on a given page. So from a front end perspective, the thing that you need to take away from here is that for each of these page layouts, you need to have a common outer markup. So say this 2-column left sidebar, this would correspond to some common outer markup, which would have a position for basically putting a placeholder where I can add the components. But this common outer markup, if it is it can be placed in any page, in any position on any page. So that would result in dividing the page into two columns, like what we are seeing here on the page. So that kind of common outer markup is required. Now, it's understandable that sometimes you might have exceptions. Like in this case, say this two column left sidebar, if it's placed at the bottom of the page, you might need some extra padding at the bottom. So things like this can be definitely accounted for. So it can be done from a backend perspective using rendering parameters. But from front end, the thing to keep in mind is that you would want to code in such exceptions with minimal markup changes, ideally just toggling a class or two and an attribute or something like that. So going back, a tip over here for the front end teams is it's a good idea to add comments for this conditional code and configurable styles in the markup itself. So if you add comments sort of as pointers to the backend developers, it helps in reducing the amount of back and forth as well. So you might want to add all the different classes and probably what it corresponds to, so that that aids the backend developer in creating the rendering parameters and conditionally rendering out these classes as well. So that's about the page layouts. Okay, the next step would be to identify reused components. And ideally, this is also something that should be done definitely in advance before the front end or back end development starts, obviously. So this is actually about maintaining a balance between managing the configurations for a component reuse versus keeping things simple. Because you will ideally go through the designs. Usually we don't really get all the designs up front. It keeps trickling in one by one. So what you would do is scan through the design and kind of see if any of the components which are on this page have already been built before, even with minimum changes here and there. So we can make them configurable. If there are any such changes, we can try and reuse and make them configurable. But you don't want to overdo it. You want to avoid over engineering. But keep in mind that when you have more components, it's also tempting to just keep things really straightforward and simple and have more components. But then more components is not just more development time. It's more time from project management perspective, the BA perspective, for documenting tickets, your front end, back end, QA, documentation, content author training. So it really adds on. So make sure that you kind of maintain this balance between reusing and definitely not overcomplicating stuff, because that again comes with its own can of worms. It's very difficult to go ahead with content author training and also reusing, also maintaining the component. Excuse me. So a small tip here is to kind of try and document your components. And I'm not talking about any elaborate documentation. It's just a sort of lookup where you have your component names and the say a screenshot of your component. That's about it. So this is usually a very handy thing, and this is something that you can build, as and when you get the designs, and as and when probably the requirement analysis itself is going on, and you're creating the tickets and stuff like that. So depending upon your process and your project teams, this might fall on the business analyst or even the front end team. So it's a good idea to have this lookup in a central location. It turns out really useful, not just for front end, but for back end and QA. And it can also be a base for creating your content author user guide if that's one of your deliverables. So it's a good idea to kind of keep this lookup handy at all times. And the way we name components, usually it gets pretty complex and convoluted sometimes, and it's difficult to put a picture on the name. So it's a good idea to have this lookup for sure. Now, your components need to be completely modular. There should be no interdependencies and no nesting of components, and no common outer tags for multiple components. So like we saw here, it should be completely independent, and I should be just able to, drop one below the other, and without any common outer tags and stuff like that. So to maintain this, it's a good idea for front-end teams as well to use templating engines right from the beginning. So using this, you would also be building the components as blocks, and then putting them together to build the pages, similar to what is going to be done in Sitecore. So if it's done right in the beginning, then there aren't any issues while creating the Sitecore pages, and we don't have to, again, do a lot of back and forth in trying to get the pages up. Something to mention here is that you need to account for instances where a particular component or a layout, as we saw before. It can appear multiple times on a page. So things like JS transformations, when you're trying to initialize, say, sliders or carousels, just keep in mind that it might appear multiple times on a given page, possibly with different content. So you might want to account for that as well. Talking about inconsistencies, so when we do we spoke about identifying reused components. So sometimes when a component is marked as reuse and it comes to you as a front end developer saying that, okay, this has to be reused, just give me a class or something that I can toggle to make it look like this. So sometimes when you get reused components sent to you for development, frankly 10 20 pixel here and there, backend developers don't even notice, but as a front end developer, that's your focus and that's something that you will notice. So this is something that is primarily the responsibility of the front end team, where you need to identify that you need to basically confirm if a certain component can be reused or not. Keep in mind that a given component can be used on any page, and within the placeholder constraints that we just spoke of, that we can restrict the component to a given placeholder, but it can appear on any page within that placeholder, on any position in the placeholder. So you need to keep that mind and see if there are any inconsistencies in the design, and whether it can be resolved by regrouping with the UX or the user experience team, or whether you need to build variants. So this is a call that I think is most important for front-end developers to take. And in case you think that as a front-end developer, the code is going to get too complicated, always push back and try to, it's better to not push back on the reuse and create additional components if it's getting too complicated as well. So this is something that I think is a good idea, especially for front end developers to keep in mind. And also remember that while you're getting designs with all these components put together in a certain sequence in a certain way, when things go to UAT, invariably you have content authors saying that, oh yeah, okay, this looks nice here, let's move things around, or that component looked nice in that page, let's put it on this page now, even though it's not there in the design. So that is something you'd like to keep in mind. And based on that, you would probably identify these inconsistencies, saying that certain padding is more here or it's less there. Does it really have to be that way? So this is something, an activity that a front-end developer ideally would do before they start their development and before they start accounting for component variants. Now, page-specific markup is a complete no-no. But the good news is that if we have followed all the points that we just spoke about, that is, identified the reuse initially, and modular components has been followed, and we have addressed design inconsistencies effectively, then this is not going to come up at all. But an example here of where I've seen this rather come up is, say, I got all the designs, and in the search results page, so all the components are just a little off. So it's very tempting from front end perspective to just add like a search result class on the top of the page in the body tag or something like that, and style for all these inconsistencies. But that is something that should not be done. Even from a backend perspective, there's not really a nice way of accounting for this. So ideally, if you do come across a scenario like this, it either needs to be addressed on a page layout level or on the component level themselves. So there are some points I'd like to go over now with regard to fields, the common fields in Sitecore. So first is the links. Out of the box, links are entered as anchor tags. So try to use anchor tags for any redirect links, as opposed to using buttons, which you could use for elements that act as switches, probably from your JS. And try to avoid any unnecessary inner HTML. So if you're trying to style, say, button text and stuff like that, try to do it based on classes set on the anchor tags themselves, as opposed to adding inner HTML just to style the text. Obviously, if you have other elements, then you need inner HTML, but again, try to avoid unnecessary ones. Images render as IMG tags by default, so try to favor those over background images. And image URLs, obviously anything that you'd like to be content manageable, they should be in the markup. One special condition to mention here, especially, is social links. So when you have, say, you have a bunch of social links in the footer, it's I've seen the tendency of the front end team to kind of use sprites and output the icons directly on from the CSS itself. So, but in this case, the requirement might be that the content author should be able to add and remove or add new social links and stuff like that without the need for more development. So in that case, you might want to keep these icons as, say, images on the markup itself. So this is something that you might want to do in discussion with the backend team as well. So moving on to rich text. So rich text is a very robust field, which frankly, it can be a boon and a curse. So it gives the flexibility to the content author to add any formatted text or formatted content. But on the flip side, it's quite tempting for the content author, especially if they're very familiar with CSS, to add a whole lot of inline CSS to make things look like they wanted to, but it also gives them the ability to break the design in this way. So as a front-end developer, what you will want to do is whatever content has been identified as rich text, and a good example of this would be your page body itself, where you want to give the content author the ability to add lists, ordered or unordered, or and links and images or tables and whatever. So in when you're trying to style something that is going to be output as rich text, then excuse me, yeah, then what you want to do is make sure that all this content that is coming, or the formatted content that is coming in the rich text, is as simple as possible, and it does not have any additional classes or attributes. To be able to style these based on your design or in adherence to your design, you might want to keep a particular custom class and make sure that the backend team always wraps any output rich text within that outer wrapper tag or class, and you can style all the rich text based on that. So that would be the best way to handle this. That being said, sometimes you get a lot of complex content in the rich text, which might need custom classes or even custom snippets. So how do we handle this? There are ways of gracefully working around complex formatted content, and two such ways are the custom classes and snippets, which you can which as a backend developer we can actually configure in the rich text editor as such. So these are the two examples. So in the rich text editor, you have a provision to actually set up the CSS classes, custom classes, which obviously you don't want the content author to have to remember such things. So if you just configure them, and the content author can select a particular class, and it's going to be output on your on the content. And the second one is the snippet. So you can configure snippets as well, where a content author can just select a snippet, and it's going to output the entire chunk of HTML onto the rich text editor, and they can update the content, just the inner content. So these are the two good examples of customizing things without having to write a single line of code. And okay, beware of the p tag. So the while a content author is actually editing content in a rich text editor, it adds p tags just to denote paragraphs as they hit enter and stuff like that. So that is something to be aware of as a front end developer, because you want to style things accordingly, and you don't want to wrap entire rich text being output within an outer p tag, because you don't want nesting in this case. So it's just something to note as a front end dev. Okay, moving on to Experience Editor. So Experience Editor is a mode in Sitecore in which you can edit your content inline on the pages themselves. So something to note here is that there is additional generated markup from Sitecore to support this kind of inline editing. So avoid using position-based selectors in CSS and JS, because it's not going to work in this case. And if you're using jQuery in your project, it's highly recommended that you use no conflict to avoid framework clashes, and use closures to wrap your code in self-invoking functions as well. Now, this is one thing that I wanted to mention here regarding sliders and carousels. These are regarding the constructs that you are transforming from your JavaScript. So it makes it a little difficult to kind of edit. Sometimes it's a little difficult to edit content within your sliders and carousels in Experience Editor mode. So I've seen a lot of experienced Sitecore front-end teams, handle this in a certain way where they have separated out the editing from the preview. So Sitecore does have another mode called preview mode. So this is just one way to do it. Only if your client agrees and you're okay with this and your design really calls for it. So I know because it's a little controversial because I'm saying it's a WYSIWYG editor, and now I'm asking you to kind of separate the preview from the editing, but it's definitely one of the ways to handle this. So what you would do is you would probably ask your backend team to output some class, um, say on your body tag, whenever a page is being loaded in Experience Editor mode. And as a front end developer, you would initialize your sliders or carousels only when the page is not being um, rendered in Experience Editor mode. So in this case, what would happen is, as a content editor, say I would see a slider as say a bunch of slides one below the other, so it would show up in that way, and I could easily edit the content in this way because it's appearing just in a very plain and simple manner. And then if I'd like to see what it looks like, I could just go into the preview mode and see these changes, where I could see changes without actually publishing stuff. So that's what the whole preview mode provision is about in Sitecore. So again, this is controversial. All clients might not agree to certain things, to such things. They might want to, see things in Experience Editor, but this is just one way to do it, and it could be a way to push things as well if you see that you are having, a lot of issues with your JS heavy markup. Now to talk about API integration and jQuery Ajax calls. So when you have components like listings, search, pagination, with filters and faceting and stuff like that, so you don't have all your content on the page directly, and you have a lot of front-end integration happening to show all the data. So in this case, this is the point where a lot or most maximum of the collaboration time can be saved if this is done or handled correctly. Ideally, as a front end developer, you would fix the JSON structure that you need the data in. So you can do this in one of two ways, depending on how much data you have. So if you have less data, you can just put it as JSON or as on the data attributes of your markup itself, and do all your front end interaction based on that. So in this case, you're not going to be going to the server for every single front end interaction. The user experience would be really great. But then this is only feasible if you have less amount of data. If you have more data, you don't want to pull everything on the initial page load and kind of bring the performance of that down. So you would use APIs in this case anyhow. So as a front end developer, while you're doing the development, it's a good idea to fix that JSON structure and put that data in the markup, the example data in the markup, or use, if you're going the API route, then use mock APIs. You can use hosts like apiary and then create mock APIs, which will return the JSON that you have fixed. And what you would do is put the mock API URL as probably in a data attribute somewhere in your markup. So as a backend developer, when I receive this markup from you, I already have the JSON structure that I need to output either on the markup itself, or I have this position where I can create my API, make sure it returns the correct JSON, and just replace the mock API URL with the one I have developed. And it should all work out of the box. It should help in reducing a lot of the back and forth time. 'Cause trust me, this is the one place that I've seen a lot of time going in collaboration, because the front end does their bit and then back end does their bit, and then again they go back, and there's like a lot of phases that come in, which can definitely be avoided if this is handled right off the bat. The last thing I'd like to talk about is Sitecore Forms. So Sitecore Forms is a plugin within Sitecore, which, and most of us are aware, it helps the in content author to build ad hoc forms using an editor that's available within Sitecore, with a variety of fields and a different combination of fields, and all of this without a single line of code. The flip side here is that all of the form markup is auto-generated. So this is probably a decision that's going to be taken beforehand before it comes to the front end developer, but it's sure a question that you might want to ask when you get designs with forms, whether Sitecore Forms is going to be used or not, because it makes the difference between you building the form versus you working around or just trying to style the markup which is already in place. Because in case of Sitecore Forms, while we definitely have the ability to style things, we don't have complete control over the generated HTML. So the best thing to do in this case, if you're using Sitecore Forms, is that get the backend developer to make a test form for you, drop in a whole lot of fields on that, just a test form with all the fields possible, and then you can work around and style the generated markup and the fields. So that would really help, instead of trying to create your own markup and then the backend team trying to kind of put stuff in places where it doesn't fit. So that would be the best way to go, to work through a test form and try to style that. And the last thing to mention here is also regarding the validations. So that is also something that can be done as a part of Sitecore Forms. So you would not want to add custom validations yourself to Sitecore Forms, but rather work around the validation messages that are generated based on the validations added on the form itself. So yeah, I guess that's all I had. If there are any questions or any points that any of you would like to add with regard to your experience, the floor is open.
Yep. So it looks like we have a couple of questions, Anandita. So it says Matt is asking a question: how important is collaboration between front end and back end developers from the beginning of the project?
Right. So it's very important actually, so that the front end team and the back end team are both. I'm sorry, I can hear myself. Okay. Sorry, actually, just muted you. So it's very important that we do work together right from the beginning, because all of these things, if we don't work together from the beginning, that's when when the backend development comes into play. That time there's a lot of back and forth that's required, and lot of unnecessary customization and trying to create additional fields and stuff like that. And this has happened in a lot of our projects as well. So you create unnecessary complications and make it uh, really complicated for content author training as well. So it's really important that front end be involved, and there are certain things that only front end would be able to contribute for and even notice, for that matter, because as backend devs you don't really notice everything that a front end developer does. So it's definitely important that, if not all the team, at least you have a lead or some of some sort, a representation of the front end team uh, during the decision making phase itself.
Awesome. I don't think we have any other questions.
Okay.
So thanks again for your time today, Anandita, and thanks again for everyone watching this lunch and learn. Hopefully, we'll have more coming through. Have a good rest of your day, guys.
Right. Thank you. Bye, everyone.